Hello everyone, today we are going to talk about Ghazali's last will. Towards the end of his life, one of his disciples approached him and asked him for the final piece of advice in a letter. It has been preserved and published under the title A Letter to a Disciple. We are going to see what is the final advice Ghazali gives to his disciple, which can also be considered as an advice to anyone who seeks knowledge and wants to be successful in this world. Ghazali begins by dismantling the belief that knowing is everything, which is usually our aim when we take up studies. Either we take it up for the purpose of earning money, or we take it up for the purpose of merely understanding the world, gaining what Plato calls intellectual pleasure. For Ghazali, to know is to be, which means that knowledge must precede action and must be directed towards action. He admonishes the disciple and says, "O youth, how many nights have you remained awake repeating science and poring over books and have denied yourself sleep? I do not know what the purpose of it was. If it was attaining worldly ends and securing its vanities and acquiring its dignities and surpassing your contemporaries and such like, woe to you, and again woe. Vanities of this world are illusory and temporary. Vanity brings pride and reputation. They are responsible for breeding character traits detrimental to seek further knowledge. Even if someone attains worldly reputation and that was the purpose the seeker aimed for, then the seeking of knowledge will stop because action is always directed towards a goal. Once that goal is achieved, it stops. And everything of this world is temporary. It remains temporarily. It is achieved through temporal means, and most importantly, it is dependent upon others. We do not feel vain because we have achieved something of our own accord. We feel vain because others inflate our reputation and get carried away by the rhetoric of knowledge. Ghazali reminds the disciple and us that, O disciple, knowledge without action is madness, and action without knowledge is void. Hence, any knowledge that does not aim at self-motivating action, that is to say, any knowledge that does not generate movement within the self, which is then transmitted to the world, is useless according to him. Knowledge must move us, which means that it should move our thoughts, our beliefs, our perspectives about the world and those around us. It must bring about a significant volitional change within us, necessitating us to act. After the discussion of knowledge and its relation to action, Ghazali advises his disciple that the seeker of knowledge is eo ipso a seeker of master or sheikh, as he calls it. He says, know that it is indispensable for the traveler to have a sheikh as guide and tutor, to expel from him the evil qualities by his training and to replace them with an excellent character. And the meaning of training resembles the act of the plowman who digs out the thorns and removes the wild plants from among the sown to stimulate its growth and make it thrive perfectly. What to know must be decided by the sheikh, because the journey of knowledge cannot even start without a guide. Anyone who wants to travel must first get in touch with the person who has already traveled the country or the city where the traveler wants to go, so that he can know how to avoid the dangers and vices of the country or the city. Similarly, it is necessary for a seeker of knowledge to know the kinds of knowledge on offer and how to approach them, and furthermore, and most importantly, which ones to stay away from. In short, what is the kind of knowledge to which we should devote our life? We need to first know the landscape of this dangerous valley of knowledge so that we don't get eaten up by the praise of ignorance found in every valley of knowledge. Then Ghazali lists down his famous 8 advisees to his disciple. 4 of them warn the disciple about the things he must avoid, and 4 of them relate to actions he must do. He begins with the warnings. The 4 things he must not do. Firstly, do not argue with anyone in any matter as far as you are able, for in this is great mischief, and its evil is greater than its benefit, since it is the source of every blameworthy quality, such as hypocrisy and envy and pride and malice and enmity and boasting and other such things. Of course, if there arises a question between you and an individual or group, and it is your purpose in it that the truth should appear and not be lost, discussion is permissible. Argumentation is only started by a person who wants to impose his or her own belief onto others. or by someone who is certain about his or her belief and just wants to annoy others. This is why Ghazali asks the disciple to stay away from it. The first form of argument is that it goes on in the heart. The person must argue with himself, but as far as discussion is concerned with the aim of getting some help or guidance, Ghazali encourages it. The second thing to avoid is to guard against and shun becoming a preacher and warner, since its mischief is much unless you practice what you preach first and then preach it to the people. Preaching is necessary to give lessons to others, but there is a very big condition underlying it. Act before preaching. If a person knows and preaches without acting, then he is not following Ghazali's advice. Knowledge for merely preaching is a rhetorician's task. It cannot bring any good apart from worldly reputation or disgrace and maybe some money. After these two advices, Ghazali warns his disciple about the lust of politicians. He says, the third thing to give up is that you have nothing to do with princes and rulers, nor see them, because the spectacle of them, gatherings with them, and socializing with them are a serious danger. He further elaborates the reason for avoiding kingly courts. It is because the seeker of knowledge has to stand by the truth and not on the side of the powerful. Any person of knowledge, whether he or she be a religious scholar or a political advisor, who is seen with the ruling class, is assumed by the public to have sold his soul to the devil. It is understood that the king will always want his words to be publicized at any cost. He has nothing to do with what is true. Every piece of information coming out of a king's mouth is political propaganda to sustain and justify his own power. And Ghazali does not want his disciple to get involved in this filth. The fourth and last thing to avoid according to Ghazali is an elaboration of the previous advice. He says, the fourth thing to give up is to accept nothing of the benefaction of princes, nor their presents, even if you know they were acquired legitimately. For expecting it degrades religion in that sycophancy, partiality for them, and complicity in their tyranny are produced by it. Here Ghazali is following the fundamental principle of Islam, that there are no kings in Islam. There are only caliphs. The true king of the worlds is God Almighty. Therefore, all a caliph has to do is to implement the law of the Almighty King. He does not have the right to rule on this earth because it is not his possession. It has been gifted by God to ensure peace and harmony among humankind, whereas tyrants only starve people to death to the point of genocide. After these four warnings, Ghazali lists down the four things that a seeker of knowledge should do. The first thing to do is to make your relations with God the exalted, such that were a servant of yours to behave thus with you, you would be content with him and not weary of liking him nor get angry. Here Ghazali gives a real life example to seek guidance. In every religion there are deities or sages that must be followed. In the same way in Islam, like in Judaism, there is only one God whose command must be followed. If a servant does not obey what the master says, then obviously there the master will become angry because of the servant's negligence. In the same way, whoever one considers to be the ultimate power must be obeyed like an obedient servant. The second thing he encourages to do deals with social life. He says, whenever you interact with people, deal with them as you would wish yourself to be dealt with by them. For a worshipper's faith is incomplete until he wants for other people what he wants for himself. Do unto others what you want others to do unto you. It is that simple. The third advice deals with the personal effects of gaining knowledge. He says, if you read or study knowledge, your knowledge must improve your heart and purge your ego. Just as if you learned that your life would only last another week. Inevitably, you would not spend it in learning about law, ethics, jurisprudence, scholastic theology, and such like, because you would know that these sciences would be inadequate for you. Instead, you would copy yourself with inspecting your heart, discerning the features of your personality, giving worldly attachments a wide berth, purging yourself of ugly traits, and you would occupy yourself in adorning God the Exalted, worshipping Him and acquiring good qualities. And not a day or night passes by for any worshipper without his death during it being a possibility. In this advice, Ghazali reminds the disciple that the best teacher for everyone to improve his or her personality is mortality. Look death in the face, always to look death in the face. Never to forget the fact that life is short, so we have to economize our time during the day, seeking knowledge that is helpful in the world but according to its needs. The greatest need is to develop our own selves. This advice is followed by the fourth and the last one, highlighting the temporality of this life. He says, you should not stock up more of the world's produce than is adequate for 1 year. Mind you, this is the very last advice that Ghazali gave. Planning for 10 years ahead is like trying to throw a stone towards the moon. Similarly, our plans will come to nothing in such a far away future. It is futile to worry ourselves with something that would definitely prove us wrong. Future is uncertain, but present is certain. Work for the present and all that is close to it, whether it be people in the present or the time close to present. The only way to know is to become how the Master wants us to become. Thank you, everyone.